never occurred to me that Malcolm had even written about it. You know, Malcolm is a very dear friend, and someone I love. But I didn't even know that Malcolm had written about it. I always think of Malcolm writing about David and Goliath.
The 10,000 hours.
Oh, well, the 10,000 hours thing. Well, that's a specific thing, right? And so, which I tease him about in the course of this book. That I think that, you know, that Malcolm was certainly making an absolutely authentic point there, which is that you can't, that getting good at something isn't something you're born with, that natural talent is meaningless without a process. I will tell you a funny story. So my kids, when they were young, and still do, adored Malcolm, and with good reason. And I was known as Not That You're Not Dad, or he was known as Not That You're Not Dad Malcolm, because he'd come over and the kids afterwards say, Malcolm is the most interesting storyteller, Not That You're Not Dad. And so Luke asked me about did I think this 10,000 hours thing was right? And I said, well, you know, I love Malcolm like a brother, but maybe there's a little shine on it. And he said, well, when did you start writing seriously, Dad? And I said, well, when I got to New York with your mother. And we figured it out, we did the math, and it turned out that Luke turned to me and said, well, you know, your 10,000 hours were up in May of 1986. And I laughed because that was when my first piece appeared in the New Yorker. And I called Malcolm and said, you know, son of a bitch, how did you know this thing? And he said, you know, with his usual extraordinary intelligence, he said, well, 10,000 hours is just a surprising way of measuring 6 years. And every professional program takes 6 years. It's 6 years from when you first go to medical school till they let you treat a patient, from when you walk into law school till when you're pleading a case yourself. It's just, every professional program is 6 years, including writing. And, well, the point is that that's absolutely true, right? And so the Beatles went to Hamburg, and they had to play for 10,000 hours. They went from being a skiffle band to being a rock and roll group. But there were a lot of other Liverpool bands that went to Hamburg, and they got to be much more proficient rock and roll groups. They didn't get to be the Beatles. That's something else. And one of the things I was trying to do in the book, not in response to Malcolm, but in elaborating my own sense of it, is to try and talk about how there may be a common grammar amongst all the things we pursue, including pursuing it for 10,000 hours or 6 years, but also that there's it's meaningless without a particular poetry to inflect it. And that poetry tends to be almost always not only idiosyncratic, but marked by willful imperfection. So the example I love to give, which isn't in the book because I only discovered it out on the road, is that in the Bob Dylan Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Dylan gave all of his papers to Tulsa. There's a letter from Dylan where he talks about how everybody criticizes his singing. And of course, Dylan was well aware that everybody criticized his singing back in the 60s. And he says, in effect, I know I don't sing that well, but I breathe better than anybody else alive. And of course, that's right. Bob Dylan isn't a great singer. He's a great breather. Rather, he invented a way in which to make an idiosyncratic pattern of breathing into singing. That's what great artists do, and that's what separates technical proficiency from originality. That's the poetic inflection that turns one into the other.